Alright, welcome to the problem of evil. This session we will talk about one of the most significant problems for the theist and really every worldview. Even though Stewart doesn't mention that, for those of you reading Stewart, every worldview has a problem of evil. Now when we're trying to evaluate worldviews, every worldview is going to have problems. You want to choose the most defensible, rationally defensible worldview. I think. The one with the least amount of problems. So, what do you have to eat, philosophically speaking, to adopt a particular worldview as true? That's what question we're asking. Alright, today we're going to talk about an introduction. Just talk about some of the severe what a problem it is. And then we're going to and then we'll look at the inductive problem, which is the real difficult problem. And finally we'll end up with a few words about the emotional problem of evil, or for the person who has good grounds to believe in God's existence and just comes upon severe suffering. And so we'll talk about that. All of us have been in a place of suffering in life, I'm sure, and we will again, and so it's more of a word of how we should view it. Alright. I hope this is said correctly. Okay. Why don't you think about some of the times that you've suffered in your life, or maybe a film where people question God's existence. Today I was just watching a show on Treblinka, a death camp in Nazi Germany. Excuse me. Where they were going to build a big gas chamber to kill 5,000 people in every 25-minute session. That, to me, is just unimaginable. It's unimaginable the kind of evil that went on in World War II, especially Nazi Germany. Pacific Theater evils were awful as well, but especially the death camps in Nazi Germany, very horrible. Okay, Bertrand Russell, famous atheist philosopher of the 20th century, mathematician, logician. Clive Staples Lewis wrote Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. Richard Swinburne, one of my favorite Christian philosophers, in the bottom corner. C.S. Lewis wrote The Problem of Pain, and you guys are reading an excerpt from that in the Stewart text. Here are some quotes. Thomas Hardy said, quote, "The first cause, in other words God, worked automatically like a somnambulist and not reflectively like a sage." What's a somnambulist? A sleepwalker. Alright, Woody Allen is famous for saying, not only is there no God, but try getting a plumber on weekends. And if it turns out there's a God, I don't think he's evil. The worst thing you can say about him is that basically he's an underachiever. We all can imagine this world could be better. F. Scott Fitzgerald said, "The world as a rule does not live on beaches and in country clubs." So, our lives are not like Caddyshack and resorts. There's a lot of poverty in the world, and the majority of humans live in poverty and whatnot. Alright. Bertrand Russell, he said, "The secret of happiness is to face the fact that the world is horrible." Alright, forgive me for putting that picture of that vampire baby. But if you guys are Walking Dead fans, look how little Carl is. Alright, it's 2015 now. He's growing up. Alright, Charles Darwin, he reflected on this problem, and this was the problem of evil. This was the problem of animal pain for him. This is a big problem why he thinks that contributed to his atheism. He said in a letter to a friend, quote, "I cannot see as plainly as others do, and as I should wish to do, evidence of design and beneficence on all sides of us. There seems to me too much misery in the world. I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have designedly created the Ichneumonidae with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars, or that a cat should play with mice." So, Darwin's saying, really, God, why, if I just can't believe that there's a designer, if you look at nature, because of the suffering of parasites in worms and whatnot. Alright? If you guys have seen that show, Monsters Within Me, some of those parasites are just horrible and awful. Why in the world would a loving and good God put all these parasites in the world? Would you, if you were God? No, that's what he said. So here's a comic, a cartoon. Yeah, look at all this natural disasters. How intelligent is its design? I like this cartoon for this woman over here in this corner where she says, "Ouch, whose dumb idea is this childbirth scheme?" So, alright. Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov. Peter Kreeft, Kreeft, he says the most devastating problem of evil is expressed by this Christian writer through his character Ivan. We won't read it, but if you've read that huge thick book where he says this kind of atheism of rejection, where this guy knows God exists, but since God allows such evil, talking about a little girl and her suffering, Ivan says, if this is what God is like, I don't want to be part of it. Alright, that was a horrible paraphrase, but there you have it. Peg Leg Sam, Born for Hard Luck. Google him, and he's a very interesting guy. Alright. 2015, we saw some serious evils in the world. Alright. We have some the massive evils, the moral evils done by the Islamic State. Beheadings of 21 Egyptian Coptic Christians in Libya, beheading of all the journalists, rape, and all the atrocities, killing of other Muslims, Christians in Iraq and Syria, and most of us think it's very evil. Now, while they think they're following, or they are following, you be the judge, parts of the Quran and the example of the Prophet Muhammad, most of us see this as very evil and not as something that God would want. Now we have the case of natural evil of Ebola, and which can be exacerbated by humans' choices. And it's funny, a few years ago I mentioned, my friend gave me this book called The Hot Virus, which was a book about the Marburg, all of these Ebola virus type things and incidents with them. But she said actually the Ebola is pretty gentle because it kills you in a short amount of time, and it's usually local. And so I had one friend argue that she doesn't think Ebola is evil. Now I think I kind of disagree, because it's horrible. You don't want to bleed out of every orifice of your body and whatnot. Alright. Those of you guys, Dr. Evil of Austin Powers fame in the 90s. Alright. C.S. Lewis said this in The Problem of Pain, quote, "Life is so arranged that all the forms of it can live only by preying upon one another. In the lower forms this process entails only death, but in the higher there appears a new quality called consciousness which enables it to be attended with pain. The creatures cause pain by being born and live by inflicting pain, and in pain they mostly die. In the most complex of all the creatures, man, yet another quality appears, which we call reason, whereby he is enabled to foresee his own pain, which henceforth is preceded with acute mental suffering, and to foresee his own death while keenly desiring permanence. It also enables men, by 100 ingenious contrivances, to inflict a great deal more pain than they otherwise could have done on one another and on the irrational creatures. This power they have exploited to the full. If you ask me to believe that this is the work of a benevolent and omnipotent spirit, I reply that all the evidence points in the opposite direction. Either there is no spirit behind the universe, or else a spirit indifferent to good and evil, or else an evil spirit." Okay, so The Problem of Pain, C.S. Lewis is a Christian, so he believes in God. He just sets this up as the problem, which I like is a nice setup. So for C.S. Lewis, he does have a big problem with animal pain, just as Darwin did. Now, William Lane Craig cites this neurological study that says that, yeah, some of the lower creatures, they don't suffer as much as humans do. Humans who can dwell on past pain, and humans that can dwell on future pain much more readily than other animals who are aware of current pain, and maybe some dogs might remember past pain, and so they cower in fear, but dogs aren't worried about the future pain of dying in 10 years or whatever. See what I mean? Alright. Peter Kreeft, he wrote, I love this book, Making Sense of Suffering. It's a fantastic book, and it's the best book, I think, on the problem of evil. And Peter Kreeft, I think, lost a son, and so he writes this, and how in the midst of suffering can I continue to believe in a God and serve and love this God in the midst of suffering and pain. And he does, I think, a fantastic job of struggling through the issue. So, the problem of evil, Kreeft says, is the most serious problem in the world. It is also the one serious objection to the existence of God. When St. Thomas Aquinas wrote his great Summa Theologica, he could only find 2 objections to the existence of God, even though he tried to list at least 3 objections to every one of the thousands of theses he tried to prove in that great work. One of the 2 objections is the apparent ability of natural science to explain everything in our experience without God. And the other is our problem this week, the problem of evil. Peter Kreeft, he also says this: more people have abandoned their faith because of the problem of evil than for any other reason. It is certainly the greatest test of faith, the greatest temptation to unbelief. And it is not just an intellectual objection. We feel it. We live it. That's why the book of Job in the Bible, the Old Testament, is so arresting. So the problem can be stated very simply. If God is so good, why is his world so bad? If an all-good, all-wise, all-loving, all-just, and all-powerful God is running the show, why does he seem to be doing such a miserable job of it? And why do bad things happen to good people? Alright. We'll skip this REM. Everybody hurts. But, alright. This is something to do this week with your friends or people you work with, family members. Try to get clear on the general problem of evil and try to set it up. I think Stewart goes overboard, but at least he tries to say this is a serious problem. Alright, you hear this in movies all the time, and most people we talk to are going to say, why do they question God's existence? Look at the evil. I heard it at Fox and Hounds last week here in Mason, Ohio. Alright. So, Peter Kreft's book. This is not it, Socrates Meets Jesus, but that's also a great one. Socrates goes to Harvard and meets some Christians. Alright, but read Peter Kreft's book. It's so great because it's written by a guy who knows suffering and who's a philosopher. He knows his world religions. He knows his philosophy, and he is trying to give people hope. So check it out. Making Sense of Suffering. I don't know about that devil Easter bunny down there. Alright. Now, there is a different problem of evil for every worldview. We're going to talk about some of this in the discussion board. But not all theists have to deal with this particular problem of evil. Alright. So, yeah, some worldviews have the problem of you can't even justify the existence of good and evil on their view. So, naturalism, scientific atheism has that severe problem. You can't even say something's evil if everything in the world is natural and nobody has free will. Everything is just nature unfolding. Some versions of Hinduism and Buddhism, they deny the existence of evil, and forms of monism where everything is God or everything is identical. Some forms of Tibetan Buddhism, yes, an illusion, Maya. Evil and good are just illusions. So, yes, for LDS philosophers and for Mormons, since God is finite on this worldview, so our Heavenly Father has a Heavenly Father, and there are many Heavenly Fathers in the universe, and we ourselves, if we follow the law of eternal progression, we can become gods or Heavenly Fathers ourselves and rule over planets where people pray to us. So the problem with that, with finite theism, is God isn't powerful enough to stamp out all evil. My Mormon friends they'll welcome that. Alright. The problem of evil, the POE, is an internal problem for people who believe in a certain type of God. One who is both omnibenevolent and omnipotent, and some say omniscient. Okay. The deductive or logical problem of evil. By the way, we want to distinguish types of evil. So you have natural evil, evil caused by natural non-human events, tsunamis, tornadoes, earthquakes, floods. Then you have moral evil, evil caused by agents or persons, murders and other crimes, that type of thing. Swinburne said this, quote, "This world is a clearly providential world in this sense. God's providence is God's rational control over things and guidance. So if something's providential, it was God intended, or God purposed." Swinburne says, "This world is a clearly providential work in this sense, that we humans can have a great influence on our own destiny, and on the destiny of the world and its other inhabitants. And it is very good for us that it is like that. And yet animals and humans suffer through natural processes of disease and accident, and they cause each other to suffer. We hurt and maim each other and cause each other to starve. The world, that is, contains much evil. An omnipotent God could have prevented this evil, and surely a perfectly good and omnipotent God would have done so. So why is there this evil? Is not its existence strong evidence against the existence of God? Swinburne says, it would be unless we can construct what is known as a theodicy, an explanation of why God would allow such evil to occur. Alright, so what is a deductive argument? This deductive argument versus inductive argument. Deductive arguments follow a certain logical form, where the conclusion follows from the premises. It necessarily or has to follow from the premises. Alright, so modus ponens is an example. If P then Q, P therefore Q. Modus tollens, if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. Alright, if the car starts, then it has gas. The car starts, therefore Q, it has gas. Alright. So the basic question is this. If God is all-powerful and if God is all-good, why wouldn't God create a world without evil? Since God can create a world without evil, it seems that God should create a world without evil. Now, this argument is supposed to show that there's a logical contradiction in believing that this type of God exists alongside of evil. Here's one way of writing it. Premise 1. An omnibenevolent, or all-good, an omnipotent, all-powerful God exists. Premise 2. Evil exists. Conclusion. Therefore, God does not exist. Alright, Tom Morris in Philosophy for Dummies. Tom Morris was a philosopher at Notre Dame. Philosophy for Dummies is his Philosophy 101 book, or course, shoved into this yellow book. But he gives a great explanation of the problem of evil argument there. Alright, let's look at Michael Tooley's version. Alright. Premise 1. If God exists, then God is omnipotent, omniscient, and morally perfect. Premise 2. If God is omnipotent, then God has the power to eliminate all evil. Premise 3. If God is omniscient, then God knows when evil exists. Premise 4. If God is morally perfect, then God has the desire to eliminate all evil. Premise 5. Evil exists. Premise 6. If evil exists and God exists, then either God doesn't have the power to eliminate all evil, or doesn't know when evil exists, or doesn't have the desire to eliminate all evil. Premise 7. Therefore, God doesn't exist. Now you can critique this and say, well, we just need to modify some of the attributes of God, so God's not as powerful, God doesn't know the future, or God's not all-knowing, or God is not all-loving. Alright. So, Tom Morris' argument is this. Premise 1, if there were a God, there would be no evil in the world. This is from the concept of God. Premise 2, there is evil in the world by observation. Premise 3, or conclusion, there is no God. Now, Tom Morris says, wait, how would someone defend premise 1? That there would be no evil in the world? Alright. So, you can pause it here and read this, but I'm going to move on from Morris's explanation. Alright, so the biggest problem is this. It seems like clearly a good person would allow suffering sometimes, especially when that suffering serves a greater purpose. Alright, so it seems obvious that there are clear cases where evil and suffering can serve a greater good. Alright, I played basketball up until my sophomore year of high school. And I remember freshman year we had to run a lot of suicides. 8th grade, 7th grade, you run a lot of suicides, these sprints in the gym. I ran track across country in high school, and we had a lot of pain and suffering. I trained for my Ironman. I did an Ironman in Arizona in 2008. That was a long day, a 96-degree weather, and it was a lot of suffering. But gosh darn it, that suffering was worth it. I ran in honor of my Grammy at the time. She was a 17-year cancer survivor, and so I had her picture on my uniform. And yeah, it was totally worth it. Alright, so what is the problem? Morris says, can a good person ever be justified in allowing or even in bringing about an instance of pain or an instance of suffering? What do you think? So we can talk about the discussion board, but basically, Benjamin Franklin said there's no gains without pains. Alright, a surgeon, a dentist, those are good examples. Sometimes suffering is for a greater good. Alright, now Leibniz, 17th century Christian philosopher, he says this, as well, William Rowe, atheist emeritus, professor at Purdue, says this. Leibniz gives the example of a general who knows that in order to achieve the good of saving the town from being destroyed by attacking an army, he must order his men to defend the town, with the result that some of his men would suffer and die. The good of saving the women and children of the town outweighs the evil of the suffering and death of a few of the town's defenders. Although he could have prevented their suffering and death by ordering a hasty retreat of the forces, the general cannot do so without losing the good of saving the town and its inhabitants. It certainly does not count against the general's goodness that he permits the evil to occur in order to achieve the good which outweighs it. Perhaps then some evils in our world are connected to goods which outweigh them in such a way that even God cannot achieve the goods in question without permitting the evils to occur that are connected to those goods. Does that make sense? So the logical argument is very problematic. Few philosophers, I don't know any who defend it. I think there's one or two still defend this argument, but most of them think that yes, it's easy to show counterexamples where a good person can allow some suffering or evil in the world for a greater good. All right. So. Now, let's go to the most difficult problem for the theist, the evidential or inductive argument from evil. Alright. I know you Texans. I'm not. Alright. I had a student. He tried to prove there is no God from the existence of Jar Jar Binks. He said, a good and loving God will not allow George Lucas to think of the character Jar Jar Binks, and not only think up of the character, but actually put him in Star Wars Episode 1. And Jar Jar Binks exists in Episode 1, therefore there is no God. The Joker, I love the DC Comics. There's no excuse for evil. There's just Joker is just evil. And bless his heart, the late Heath Ledger there is the Joker in The Dark Knight. And our Texas former governor, former president, 2 terms, George W. Bush, I disagree. I don't think he's 100% pure evil. That's just a joke. Alright, the inductive problem. It's also called the probabilistic problem or the evidential problem. Alright. 28 days later, the virus, the zombie virus, sad case of burning Bambi we'll talk about. So William Rowe, actually, he went to seminary, I think, if I remember correctly, but he actually left and decided not to become a priest and actually became an atheist, thanks to the problem of evil. This was the biggest problem in his mind. I love William Rowe. His book, Philosophy of Religion, that we're reading here, and here as well, you have a quiz on it. He's just the most fair atheist I've read. Atheist is just fantastic. So I think I give him an A on that book. There's very little I have to quibble about. Rowe says this on page 119. I turn now to the evidential form of the problem of evil. The form of the problem which holds that the variety and profusion of evil in our world, although perhaps not logically inconsistent with the existence of God, nevertheless provides rational support for the belief that the theistic God does not exist or doesn't love us as much as we think she does, or isn't powerful enough to stamp out all evil, or is finite in knowledge. Alright, so What's an inductive argument? An inductive argument is an argument in which it's thought that the premises provide reasons supporting the probable truth of the conclusion. In an inductive argument, the premises are intended only to be so strong that if they are true, then it is unlikely that the conclusion is false. Most of our arguments in science are inductive. In law, a prosecutor, say a circumstantial evidence murder trial, you give all these pieces of evidence for the conclusion that the defendant is either guilty or not guilty. Okay, so climate change, you can't prove that with a deductive proof. You'd have to have an inductive proof. You provide all this evidence for climate change or all this evidence against climate change, that type of thing. So we're giving evidence that God might not exist. Alright, so we're going to focus on unnecessary or gratuitous evil. So the most important inductive argument, there's many forms of it actually, is the argument from gratuitous evil. As we saw by the rejection of the deductive argument from evil, it's easy to see how God could have a use for some suffering and evil in the world. But the problem is this: it seems that there is too much or senseless or unnecessary or gratuitous evil in the world. Thus, gratuitous evil is the most difficult type of evil for the classical theist to explain away. Does that make sense? So again, the definition of gratuitous evil is unnecessary evil, or evil that does not serve some greater purpose. It's pointless. Alright? So, William Rowe, he came up with this example of poor little burning Bambi. So imagine a roaring forest fire out in Yellowstone National Park. Little Bambi gets separated from her mother and suffers from burns and smoke inhalation for days before she is forced to die a horrific, painful death in the flames. God, being omnibenevolent and omnipotent, could have stopped this from happening quite easily. Alright, so proponents of this evidential argument from evil usually claim that Bambi suffered for no good reason. And in fact, a good God who is all-powerful would not let such pointless evil occur. Alright, the horrible case of little Sue, but you could use any case of child abuse. You know, why does God allow any adult to abuse emotionally, sexually, physically a child? And if you watch Investigation Discovery, you see horrible cases of how in the world can some people be so evil to torture, kids or lock them up in a basement. The case in Cleveland a few years ago where there's 3 girls were held prisoner. How in the world, why, God, would you allow this? Alright. And we look at the Nazi Germany, we can look at ISIS. God, why do you allow ISIS to function like this? International Justice Mission, check them out, ijm.org. But they are committed to stopping modern-day slavery. I think they said a few years ago there's at least 20 million people in the world who are enslaved. Alright, William Rowe's article in 1979, Premise 1. There exist instances of intense suffering which an omniscient being could have prevented without thereby losing some greater good or permitting some evil equally bad or worse. Premise 2. An omniscient, wholly good being would prevent the occurrence of any intense suffering it could, unless it could not do so without thereby losing some greater good or permitting some evil equally bad or worse. Conclusion. There does not exist an omnipotent, omniscient, wholly good being. So let's simplify William Rowe's version. Premise 1. There is gratuitous evil. Premise 2. If an omniscient, wholly good God exists, no gratuitous evil exists. And conclusion. Therefore, no omniscient, wholly good being exists. So this is reasoning by modus tollens. If P, then Q. Not Q, therefore not P. Alright. So, William Rowe takes that even one case of gratuitous suffering is incompatible with theism. Okay? Now that's stronger than I think it's warranted, but they think so. So this argument specifically attacks classical theism, a God with all the omni-properties. Alright, and Rowe's claim is that we have sufficient grounds for believing that the suffering of Bambi and Sue is gratuitous. We don't know it with certainty, but we have pretty good reason. Alright, good evidence. Just like any scientific theory, we can't know scientific theories are true with absolute certainty, but we have pretty darn good evidence. Alright, so now while many people will pick at P1 and P2, at least most philosophers think that Rowe has provided a plausible formulation of necessary conditions for divine sufficient reasons for permitting gratuitous evil. Alright, so this is not an internal argument against Christian theism. Now, it would take an omniscient God to tell us if some greater good was achieved by little Bambi getting cooked in the forest fire. Alright, so Rowe says, yeah, we can't know with certainty that gratuitous evil exists, but we have pretty good reason to believe it exists. Alright, some responses to the inductive problem. Alright. Well, let's skip down to what William Alston and William Lane Craig say. Bill Alston and William Lane Craig, they say this. So Craig argues that a full revelatory tradition, Christian, Islamic, Jewish, etc., will give us more to go on when trying to determine why God might allow evil. So, if you belong to another religious tradition, you might look for similar or analogous arguments from your own revealed tradition. Remember, the Buddha's mission in life was to solve the problem of evil and suffering. Alright. Now, Craig's response to Rowe. We're wondering that premise 2, does gratuitous evil exist? Quote, one man's motive is another man's atonements. Now you could start reasoning at either end of the premises and get the opposite conclusion. So this is the G.E. Moore strategy in the Rowe book. And it also shows the strategy of Thomas Aquinas with his 5 ways. If you can show that God exists and prove it with all these arguments, then you can ignore the problem of evil. Okay? So that's why the classical theist can say this. Premise 1, if God exists, gratuitous evil does not exist. Premise 2, God exists. Conclusion, therefore gratuitous evil doesn't exist. Alright? So, if you can show God exists, there is no gratuitous evil. So, as Craig says, the problem of evil is only a problem for the theist who has lousy grounds for believing in theism. So if someone doesn't have a good reason to believe in God, these arguments might not persuade you to believe that God exists. God does not exist. Alright? So William Lane Craig claims that Rowe's indirect attack can be dismissed with substantial arguments for God's existence, like the Kalam cosmological argument and the New Design argument. Alright? So what it comes down to, thinking classical theists will be more certain that God exists than they will be that gratuitous evil exists. Does this make sense? So you have two sides of the balance, and on one side you have the Kalam cosmological argument, the design argument from fine-tuning, you have the argument from consciousness, or the noological argument, you have the moral argument, and so on. So you have all these arguments for God's existence, and if those are very substantial, then the problem of evil doesn't chip away, and it doesn't affect the theism. Does that make sense? Alright, let's talk about it on the discussion board if you're confused. Bill Alston, the inductive argument from evil, his article, He says there's easy ways out of the inductive argument. Quote, "We might have sufficient grounds for believing in the existence of God, whether from arguments of natural theology, religious experience, or whatever, including sufficient grounds for taking God to be omnipotent, omniscient, and perfectly good, and that could put us in a position to not deny premise 1, or the premise in the argument that claims gratuitous evil exists." Now, God might reveal that premise 1 is false. Revelation might provide not only justification for denying that gratuitous evil exists, but also justification for beliefs about what God's reasons are for permitting this or that case of suffering. Alright? Those are the easy ways out. Tom Morris, who's also a Christian philosopher, Philosophy for Dummies, he says this, quote, "The theist can suggest and in fact must claim that God is morally justified in allowing or bringing about every instance of evil in the world. Nothing can slip through the net. A single instance of pain or suffering whose occurrence or whose allowance had absolutely no moral justification whatsoever would, by the revised argument from evil, be enough to show that there is no God, or at least no creator, like the one that classical theism claims. So, God's smaller, is not as loving, not as powerful, doesn't know as much." Quote, Tom Morris again, "Because we are considering the atheist's inductive argument from gratuitous evil against the existence of God, the burden of proof with respect to the persuasiveness of this argument is on the atheist to show us the truth of his second premise. But what can he do? The most an atheist can do, the most he can accomplish in this regard, is to remind us of the horrific nature of some of the evils in the world and appeal to our moral intuitions to judge that they could not possibly be morally justified under any conceivable circumstances." So, what is Morris saying here? You can't prove with certainty that this particular case of suffering or evil is gratuitous or unnecessary. But you just have to say, look at the Holocaust. Really, God? Or look at Ebola. Really? Or look at Islamic State's actions right now. And say, really? God, if you exist, why wouldn't you do anything? Alright. Bill Alston says this. William Alston. "Our epistemic vantage point is very limited. Epistemology is a science of knowledge." And as Thomas Reed says this, quote, "Every conjecture we can form with regards to the works of God has as little probability as the conjectures of a child with regards to the works of man." So, God, compared to humans, if God exists, has a lot more knowledge than human beings. So, how can we, as finite human beings, judge what God's doing? How do we know the plans of God and know that this evil can't serve some greater good? Just like a child trying to figure out what a parent is doing, the child has no idea what parents are doing or the president's doing, and that type of thing. So, again, William Alston says, "We are not in a good epistemic position to judge." Alright. William Lane Craig talked about the complexity of the causal nexus in the world. Excuse me. To add evidence of Alston's explanation of why we're not in a good epistemic position to determine if gratuitous evil exists, William Lane Craig appears to chaos theory as a further evidence that we are not in a good epistemic position to evaluate whether or not gratuitous evil exists. Alright? So, I think you guys have heard of chaos theory or the butterfly effect. Basically, this says that macro systems are inherently unstable. And so, some little variable can start a chain of events to upset a whole macro system. So, a butterfly flapping her wings in West Africa can start a chain of events to cause hurricanes in Northern America, in Louisiana. Does that make sense? So, if you saw the movie Butterfly Effect with Ashton Kutcher, he goes back and makes little tiny changes in the past, and it has enormous impact on the future. Alright? Shoot, was it Isaac Asimov? I used to read him as a kid. He had a short story. I think it was Isaac Asimov. And he's the one who named it the butterfly effect. Because it was actually somebody went back in time and stepped on a little butterfly back in the millions of years ago in the dinosaur era. And that death of that butterfly had a huge effect on the modern day world. Alright, you get it. So, Craig argues small events of seemingly gratuitous suffering like the death of little Bambi in the forest fire might have positive consequences hundreds of years from now on some other continent. We just can't know. We are simply not in a good epistemic position to determine whether or not gratuitous evil exists. There may be some purposes that we can never see in this life. The causal nexus is too complex. Alright, so yeah, all the instances of suffering in the Holocaust, or instances of suffering in your own life, and you watch this TV and you see these senseless murders, maybe God is setting up a causal chain and allowing that evil to happen, that moral evil by free choice, or natural evil. Why did this kid get hurt by this falling rock? It's going to have an impact hundreds of years from now in Russia. Who knows? For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. For want of a rider, the battle was lost. For want of the battle, the kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a horseshoe nail. So, for the farrier's wife to steal that horseshoe nail to put in her hair that morning, she had no idea stealing that one nail would cause the kingdom to be lost. Alright, what do you guys think? Do you believe that this tactic of the skeptical theist is sufficient to dismiss Rowe's argument from gratuitous evil? Alston and Craig think our epistemic situation is so limited that there's no way we can judge if evil is gratuitous or not. So what do you think? Are you with William Rowe or William Lane Craig? Talk about this. Now, philosophers who think that there needs to be a theodicy or an explanation. Alright. Now, Craig argues this: certain Christian hypotheses make evil more probable than not. Hold off on this for a second. This is very interesting. I started working on a paper years ago about the appearance of pain. Now, I don't think there is a good evolutionary explanation of pain. So this is a species of the problem of consciousness, since pain is a conscious mental state. Pain in my foot, pain in my tailbone. I fell down the stairs Friday. Boom, 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 boom. I was supposed to go to Memphis to a philosophy conference. And I was going downstairs in the morning and just cut out holes in 2 pillows for my coccyx. Alright. I'm suffering right now is what I'm saying. Why do I suffer? Now, I was at a pain conference, philosophy of pain conference, years ago at the University of Cincinnati. And there was a speaker, and she said pain is an adaptation. And all the philosophers of evolutionary biology went crazy. They say, whoa, 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 you can't just say this. Why did pain arise in the first place? How did it show up? And it was selected for versus what? And so a lot of our responses we're not even consciously aware of, okay, in our nervous system. Alright, there's different pain fibers, alpha delta fibers, C fibers, and so on, that do different things. Anyway, we could potentially be zombies. If you watch The Walking Dead, these zombies kind of walk around, but we could be complex zombies without pain. There would be other ways to alert our attention without pain. Now, my own view is that the theistic explanation is the best explanation of pain. Alright, that God gave us this pain. Alright. So, given that, that's sufficient, since I don't think naturalistic explanations make sense of the consciousness, appearance of pain at all, that's why I think theism wins. All right, from the get-go, before I even do this problem of suffering. But I might be crazy. Now, this is what John Hick says, the Soul-Making Theodicy, the article you're reading. And I want you to get clear on John Hick. And we're going to talk about this at the discussion board. John Hick says, you know what? The purpose of life for a good, loving God who gives humans free will is not so we can live Hugh Hefner-like lives in the grotto, all right, just lives of hedonistic pleasure. But it's actually, He wants to grow us into people of good moral character and virtue who know Him and love Him and enjoy Him or her. Okay? So, if Christian theism is true, God would not just want to put us in a pleasure machine. God would want to give us a world where we can actually grow in character. He would want to give us a gym. All right? I have all these friends doing CrossFit right now. I'm afraid of it. But, yeah, I'm an LA Fitness guy. Just, God would give us a gym. And the gym is not a place of total pleasure. There's some pain going on in there. So John Hick says, yeah, we are not pets in God's cage or in a terrarium. God's job is not to make us a nice little cage and keep us happy. The knowledge of God is an incommensurate good. All right. The next few slides on the eternal weight of glory, C.S. Lewis writes about, waiting for the saints in heaven. So any suffering in this short life will pale in comparison to the experience of eternity with a powerful and holy God. So the longer people live in the afterlife, the shorter their human lives will seem. In fact, given the length of eternity, our lives on this earth should be seen as the foyer into the great hall of eternity. Now, does that make sense? So, imagine that Christian theism is true. And when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun in God's presence in the new Jerusalem, will we care? How much will we care about our past lives? Say, my grandma's 101 right now. How much will she care about her 100+ years on this earth, 10,000 years from now? You see what I mean? So, you yourself, look back on the suffering of your life. You know, some of my friends say they liked all the suffering because it made them who they are today. I don't necessarily buy that. I think I should have made better choices in the past. I would have had less suffering. My appendix blew up 3 weeks before my second Ironman, or third Ironman. And I went to a young doctor. I went to the wrong hospital, and I didn't ask for antibiotics. And I got infected, and I spent a week in the hospital after I was home for 3 days. I made some bad choices, and you know what? Maybe that evil came in my life, and I couldn't do that Ironman. I was so upset. I cried. They had to give me Ativan to calm me down in the hospital. But maybe God did that to prevent me from killing myself in that Ironman. I don't know. But I think I could have made better choices. I think I lost my train of thought there. Point is, we look back on some of the suffering in our past, and we don't even think about it. So what does it matter if we suffer every day for 100-some years of our lives, if we have a paradise of 10,000 years after that? Does that make sense? Talk about that on the board, discussion board. All right. Corinth was the Las Vegas of ancient Greece. All right. And Paul spent a lot of time there as a tent maker, and he wrote this to the church at Corinth. 2 Corinthians 4:16-18. Therefore we do not lose heart, but though our outer man, our bodies, are decaying, yet our inner man, our spirit or soul, is being renewed day by day. For momentary light affliction, in other words, the suffering and evil done to us, is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. And he wrote to the Roman church, Romans 8:18, quote, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us." So on Christian theism, this life is not all there is. And in fact, this is a fallen world, and many aspects of it are corrupt. And yes, there is evil and suffering. And compared to what God gives us and the transformation of our inner souls is incomparable. So if you put these both on a balanced scale, the suffering and evil of this life and decay of our bodies compares not at all to eternity with the presence of the true, the good, and the beautiful, or God. So I think this is really cool. I mean, this Christianity, even if it's false, it is a religion of hope. It is a religion of hope. Now, Marx will say it's an opium. It's an opiate. It's a drug of the people. And humans invent this. But, so yes, it is a beautiful story. And I actually think it's true. James, the brother or cousin of Jesus, said this, James 1:2-6, quote, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. But when he asks, he must believe and not doubt, because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind." Alright. Consider it pure joy. So a lot of people, philosophers, agree with these intuitions. I don't have Socrates on here, but Socrates is a good example. So, what do these guys say here? Henry Ward Beecher said, "Happiness is not the goal or end of life, character is." That's John Hick's soul-making theodicy. Thomas Carlyle said, "Pain was not given thee merely to be miserable under. Learnt from it, turn it to account." Emerson said this, "Every evil to which we do not succumb is a benefactor." Nietzsche was an atheist. And yes, it's something similar. Or maybe it was Kelly Clarkson first. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Now, there's a very interesting argument from evil to God. This is what we covered in the moral argument. So William Lane Craig argues that for evil to exist, an objective goodness must exist as well. This is Thomas Aquinas' argument. Alright, his fourth way. Since a brute Platonism, remember Platonism is a view that there is no God, but there's a robust non-physical world of souls and minds and human organisms, and beauty and love and goodness and evil. That these things are real, even though they're not physical, they exist. Alright, since a brute Platonism is unreasonable for him, theism best explains the presence of evil. Because evil exists, God must exist. So this is my view. The naturalist, the scientific atheist, has the worst problem, where you can't believe in evil and good at all. Alright, because remember on naturalism, scientific atheism, the Big Bang happened, or multiverse theory. Humans evolved. We are just magnificent meat machines on naturalism. There's nothing special about us. We are parts of nature like every other part of nature. Everything we do and create is nature unfolding. So even this couch I'm laying on, it's not an artifact, it's a natural object. So volcanoes destroying towns, that's just as natural as ISIS destroying a town. Alright? ISIS beheading 21 Christians in Libya, that's just as natural as a platypus giving birth. Like platypuses lay eggs, don't they? And whatever, you know what I mean? So, yes, beheadings are just as natural as rain falling from the sky. Nothing is wrong. This was Darwin's dangerous idea. There's no free will, there's no purposes, there's no nature, there's no way things ought to be. Nature is the way it is, and everything is made of atoms. Atoms follow the laws of chemistry and physics. That's it. So for me, that's why I find naturalism to be so implausible, and why I think theism is much more reasonable. You be the judge. The Southern California band Switchfoot, they have a song 10 years ago or so called "The Shadow Proves the Sunshine." I thought it was fantastic, and this is exactly what it says. If you see a shadow, that means there's sunshine. So if you see a shadow, or if you see evil, that proves that there's goodness. Alright? What's the best explanation of goodness? God. Theism. Because good and evil can't exist on naturalism. Alright? So. Now, William Lane Craig gives a fourth argument. He says gratuitous evil or unnecessary evil might exist. Craig argues that it is only in a world where seemingly gratuitous evil exists is one where people will turn to God. So in this sense, the evil really isn't gratuitous, since good came out of it for the new believer. But at least it appears to be gratuitous. So, does that make sense? Like C.S. Lewis said, pain is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. If we didn't have tests, we wouldn't pray. Alright? If we didn't have trials, we might not pray. We might never turn to God because we think we're sufficient to live on our own steam. When on the Christian worldview, God designed us with a God-shaped hole, as Augustine says, so that we always return to God for our spiritual fuel daily or constantly throughout the day. We're continually relying upon God or the person of Jesus. And that's even if Christianity is false, I love that Jesus said, "And behold, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age." So Jesus always promised to be with those who are serving or following him. Alright. Does this make sense? Here it is. C.S. Lewis said this: God whispers in our pleasures, but shouts in our pains. Pain is his megaphone to rouse a dulled world. Let us know what you think about this on the discussion board. And the kingdom of God. Now, Craig argues that seemingly pointless evils might have a tremendous benefits for the kingdom of God overall in the scheme of human history, the whole of human history. So if God's purpose in history is to bring his rule to earth, then we would have good reason to think that God might allow evil in many circumstances to achieve certain goals. So, as Dallas Willard, one of my favorite Christian philosophers, he died a year ago or so, he said, God's kingdom is the effective range of his rule, or his will. And so God wants humans to bring the true, the good, and the beautiful to everything we touch on this earth. And so, if God wants to set up his kingdom on this earth and get as many people in heaven as possible and do as much good, stamp out as much evil on this earth as possible, God might allow some evil. Like Leibniz said, the general might sacrifice some people to save the whole town. So, for instance, the deaths of 20 to 70 million people by the atheistic policies of Chairman Mao in China has had a profound effect on the Chinese peoples by destroying the presence of Buddhism. You be the judge whether that's for better or for worse. So this allows for an easier acceptance of Christianity by the Chinese. So in 1989, the number of evangelical Christians in Asia surpassed that of Christians in North and South America. In 1990, the number of Christians in Asia surpassed the number of Christians in Western Europe and the Americas combined. So, unbelievably, Christianity is more of an Asian religion than it is a Western religion. So I teach Eastern philosophy, but there are more Christians in Asia, and so, I mean, historically it was a religion of the West, but you get the point. So that's amazing to think about, and I don't think that most students think about this. Yeah, Christianity is bigger in Asia than it is in the United States, Canada, Brazil, South America, and Europe. Alright. So you have Rowe's text online. I skimmed that chapter, and yeah, read his conclusion, and what do you guys think? Alright, let's talk about the emotional problem of evil for a little bit. This, to many, is the largest problem. Okay? This is the problem from specific evils in our lives. Death, breakups, sickness, disappointment. When my Grammy died 3 weeks after I ran the Ironman 4, in May of 2008, I mean, it devastated the family. I mean, me especially. Like, I didn't realize how much of glue she was for the entire family. I don't know if you guys have a matriarch like that, but this woman was kind of the glue for, like, all my aunts, uncles, cousins, and me and my sisters and stuff like that. So we suffered. I know she's with, on my worldview, she's with her Lord Jesus in paradise, but there's still that loss and suffering. Just death is an evil, I think. We weren't meant to die. Breakups destroy people. I had to leave the country. In fact, one of the major answers to prayer in my life, this woman I was trying to get away from, we went to therapy, we broke up, and then we're in therapy for 5 months trying to get back together. And so I was like, I got to get out of the country. I got to get away from her. So I prayed, God, please get me out of the country from April to August. And I wrote that in my prayer journal, my 2959 prayer journal. And 3 weeks later, I had a friend come in through town. Her father died. I had not seen her since the summer of 1994 in Yellowstone National Park. But I told her what I was praying for. She drove home to Dallas, and the next day she heard missionaries at her church needed a house sitter in France from April to August. And guess what? She called me, and I was in France that April to August. That was one of the most specific answers to prayer I've had. It was phenomenal. So, breakups can be horrible. Divorce is like a death, as some of you guys know. Sickness can be horrible. Disappointment. There's just suffering in the world. Alright, when people are facing great pain and suffering, the problem of evil is most readily apparent. Now, consoling someone by saying, God has morally sufficient reason to permit this evil in your life, that's not going to help anything at all. Alright? If you guys read in Stewart the article about Hinduism and karma, or Buddhism and karma, explaining the philosophy of karma is not going to help somebody. So you remember on the karmic system, suffering is deserved. So the Dalai Lama, when he was on, I saw him on Larry King Live, he's like, yes, Hurricane Katrina, people suffered. Why? Because that's their karma. They deserve that suffering. Okay, all suffering is deserved on Buddhism and Hinduism. So the Dalai Lama, the Buddhist monks I hang out with here in Cincinnati, after 9/11 years ago, they were like, I couldn't believe they said it, but it was like, yes, those people died and suffered, and the family members suffered in New York City and D.C. because they earned that suffering through decisions in this life or their past life. So Buddhism and Hinduism, law of karma, that is so harsh. You should, if you're a Buddhist or Hindu, please do not try to console your friend. Oh, the reason why you're suffering is because of some past decision you made. Yeah, don't tell them that. In the same way, if you're a theist, a Christian, Jew, Muslim, or a Ramanuja style Hindu, then what you're going to say, don't tell people this line. Okay? People need someone to sit with them. Hug them. Don't offer platitudes and past experience or the stupid, oh, I know exactly how you feel. If you've been there, you want to tell someone to shut up. That's not comforting. Alright? And yeah, I had a major disappointment in my life. I was working on a study abroad to go to Greece, and I had a major falling out with the dean, and it was so bad, and I was so depressed and so upset of having everything me and these students worked for crushed, that and I had some students in my ministry tell me, oh, God wants to take you to a better place, or a better job, or this, that. I didn't want to hear any of that. I don't want to hear God has morally sufficient reason for permitting the suffering. I want you to sit by me, drink a coffee, drink a beer with me, and then curse this guy. Now, that's not healthy, but you know what I mean. You want somebody just to be with you and not tell you some stupid platitudes. Oh, it's going to be so much better. You want somebody standing next to you saying that this just sucks. Alright. That's enough of that. So, William Lane Craig says, a Christian response, the emotional argument requires a pastoral response. A response by friends with love. So, it's not to say that the emotional problem is not substantial. It may be the most serious of the three problems for individuals. But we need to love each other and be the hands and feet of Jesus, on Christian theism at least, to each other in suffering. Alright. Now, Craig thinks, this emotional problem could lead to Ivan's atheism of rejection, where you believe in God, but you're not choosing to follow him. So Dostoevsky's work on the problem of evil, Brothers Karamazov, Ivan does not care if God had a morally sufficient reason to allow for the suffering of this little girl. He chooses not to believe in a God like that. So even if God exists, if God would permit such a suffering and evil, then there's no reason to acknowledge such a divine being. So I think a lot of us are like that. Wow, if this person would allow this, you don't want to be around him. Alright. William Lane Craig, he gives I forget the professor's name. A guy who at Westmont College. His book is called Trying to Be Good, and it gives this fantastic story of this woman, Mabel, where she was in a nursing home suffering, and she was blind and had these tumors and could hardly talk. And this guy would come in every day, and this woman had such joy that she was in love with the person of God, the person of Jesus. And he just was shocked by her faith and how even in her suffering she could just find that kind of joy. And so that's I think a testament to the power of God. But if you're a skeptic, it's something to check out. You can read it if you click on this link. Michael Gross, Mabel. William Lane Craig, you can, for a review of all this stuff in the future, look at his podcasts or articles. He does a podcast a week, I think. 1 or 2 a week. And talking about different issues. So evil comes up again and again, probably 10 times throughout the year. So, I have the app on my phone. I like to listen to that on that back porch and stuff. But, even if you disagree with William Lane Craig, learn these arguments, learn the views, and see what you think. Alright. Tom Morris talks about the element of mystery. The book of Job, the book of Isaiah is interesting. This is often quoted. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So, a comprehended God is not God. These are very interesting things. If God is omniscient, all-powerful, we have no idea what God is doing half the time. Alright? Just like we have no idea what a parent is doing or a coach is doing sometimes, but we trust him, or should trust him. Now, these chapters are some of my favorite chapters in the Bible. I think it's just fantastic. Job, who suffered immensely, gets to the point, And I love God. An answer is not given to why. God does not explain why he allowed this Job to suffer so much. God does not tell him why. Instead, he says, gird yourself like a man. I'm going to question you. And then God just goes off. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Where were you when I, put water in the sea? Or when I put the Pleiades, the stars in the sky? Where were you? And so God reaffirms, I am the creator and designer of this universe. Look at how magnificent this universe is. Look at my power. Look at my knowledge. Basically saying, you can trust me. If I can throw stars up in this, if I can design human beings, if I can, create this earth, you can trust me. It's fantastic. Whether it's true or false, or there is no God or not, I think it's fantastic. Alright. In fancy language, it's this. Instead, the questioner is reminded of his limited epistemic status, the greatness of God as designer, creator, and sustainer of this magnificent universe. Tom Morris, quote, any theism that didn't ultimately point to mystery would not be a very believable worldview, so we must not regret our final use of the concept of mystery. It is not an unfortunate desperation ploy, but a necessary part of any exalted theism. What do you guys think about this? So, I think there's going to be some disagreements, but the greatness of God and the mysterious ways. Talk about this on discussion board. Let me know what you think. Alright. Now, practice these arguments from evil on your friends. Be able to be persuasive. Give the most persuasive form of the inductive problem of evil, from gratuitous evil, to your friends. Know all those responses by William Lane Craig. Alright? That William Lane Craig doesn't think that we're in a good epistemic place to judge. Also, if you have a full revelatory tradition, you might have good arguments. Remember Aquinas, if you can show all these arguments for God's existence, the problem of evil is negligible. Alright? And, our epistemic vantage point is limited, as we just talked about with Job. The relevance of chaos theory. Try the chaos theory thing out on your friends, see what they think. Okay? And talk about John Hick's soul-making theodicy. We're going to spend time on the discussion board on that question. But for the Christian theist, the purpose of life is not happiness or pleasure. The purpose of life is the knowledge of God. And the eternal weight of glory. This life is short compared to the time, 10,000 years, millions of years with God in paradise. Okay? This echoes Socrates, and so on. Also, the argument from evil to God, the shadow proves the sunshine. If evil exists, there must be good. Thomas Aquinas' fourth way. And also, the appearance of gratuitous evil. Gratuitous evil might exist, and that it has the appearance of gratuitous evil. That's the only way we would turn to God. Pain is God's megaphone to rouse a dulled world. Alright, finally, the kingdom of God. If Christianity is true, there should be more humans on the earth who are Christians than not, eventually. So, alright. Summary. The traditional deductive logical argument is flawed and rejected by most philosophers. Why? There's easy reasons why we can see that a good person would allow some suffering for some greater good. But the probabilistic or the evidential argument from gratuitous evil is a larger problem for the theist. Whether or not theism is reasonable will depend on the strength of arguments for God's existence. Otherwise, a person will be tempted to believe in gratuitous evil. So, if none of the arguments we've studied so far, the cosmological arguments, the design arguments, the arguments from consciousness and mind, the moral arguments, and so on. If those arguments don't give you any evidence at all, then yes, the gratuitous evil argument is going to be a severe problem. But if you're overwhelmed with all those arguments, have overwhelming reason to believe in God, gratuitous evil won't bug you that much. Okay. Now, William Lane Craig thinks the question is not how likely is evil gratuitous given the theistic hypothesis. He says the question is how likely is the theistic hypothesis. So, in this debate, we have two competing hypotheses. Number one, God has reasons for evil we do not know of, or there's no reason for evil. So the appearance of gratuitous evil is equally probable on both hypotheses. The one that says there's no reason, so it appears gratuitous, and the other says that there is an unknown reason for the apparently gratuitous evil. Alright? So, try this. Take this philosophy to the street. Try these arguments out on your friends, and post what they say on discussion board. Argue both sides of the coin. Alright. Okay. And Kref says this, quote, I believe in God, the God of the Bible, the all-powerful Creator, the all-loving Father. That does not solve my problem of suffering. That makes it worse. Maybe God is going to be part of the solution, but he starts out being part of the problem. For how can an all-powerful and all-loving God allow his innocent babies to suffer? That is the problem. Not just suffering, but the scandal of suffering in a God-made and a God-ruled universe. I love that. So yeah, naturalism is just, the problem of evil is just awful. There's no good, there's no evil, but we suffer, we die. But yeah, you throw God in there, wait a minute, why, God, did you allow the suffering? I watched this show about the end of World War II, and they had these American soldiers talking, and that was the first thought when they saw all these walking skeletons, all these people in the concentration camps. Why, God? Why did you allow this to happen? Alright. My good friend, Kristen Williams, she just adopted a baby. She just got her a few weeks ago from India. But when this baby was thrown into a trash heap, a garbage pit, and ants ate off her nose, and then somebody rescued her. But, so yeah. Why, God? Why would you allow this to happen? Now, I think this story is redemptive and beautiful that my friend is able to adopt her. My sister's trying to get her on Ellen, but we'll see. Alright. So, I would read Making Sense of Suffering someday. It's just fantastic, even if you disagree. So, to quote Kreft again, this book is not a neat set of answers for believers to beat unbelievers with. It is a record of a real, honest personal quest, a lived journey of exploration in life's darkest cave. I do not ask or expect everyone to agree with me at the beginning of the journey, or at the end, only to come along, for this is life's deepest journey, deepest cave, deepest question for each of the 7 people listed above. Orthodox Christians, unorthodox Christians, non-Christian theists, religious persons in general, honest questioning agnostics, rational atheists who disbelieve in God because of the problem of evil, rebels, atheists like Camus and Ivan Karamazov who refuse a God who allows such atrocities. So read this book someday. Fantastic. Alright. I'll end with that. But, David Hume, we'll skip that. we'll stop her there. And there you have it. This is Wednesday, March 18th, 17th, 2015. Gonna go see Grandma. Bye.